Hello, everybody. So we're up to module 6, one module per week 6 of 8. So we're getting very near the end. This week we'll be looking at cybersecurity, which a big tenet of that cybersecurity in general is education. Right? The cybersecurity expert at a company has to educate the rest of their coworkers on what keeps the thing secure. So, especially at this level, introduction to it, it's a lot of vocabulary this week. It's pretty much just all vocabulary. On Wednesday, we'll break it up a little. We're looking at the attacks and maybe look at some small sample versions of the attacks that wouldn't actually hurt anything. Like I have a database set up for SQL or for query injection and do something that's the same logic as a denial of service attack, but we'll just set a ping because one bit isn't going to bog down any server, but the logic behind it. And that way we're doing something. But this week it's a lot of vocabulary this week. Those sort of lectures, but they're important terms. We want to keep them in mind. It's a big deal in the world. That is one of the kind of alternate between which program here at Ivy Tech School of IT is most popular, either software development or cybersecurity, and it's not by much. The two of them together are usually like 98, 99% of the School of IT. And, a couple other people study databases or something. Most people here are doing software development or cybersecurity, one or the other. A very in-demand job these days as well. So if you're looking for a good stable career, right now it looks like cybersecurity is going to be a stable career for the foreseeable future. But for introducing it, I guess we can just jump in here. At some point we might have to pause the lecture. There's marketing department wanted to take some photos. They listed computer stuff on there, so you might step over there, have some more bodies in the picture, just pose for the pictures, kind of fill out the desk. I don't know if they wanted the regular looking computer lab. I think they wanted the fancy one around the corner. So might have to pause for a moment to do that. Because in the summer, there's not many people on campus. I was going this morning, all the people that are in one of the programs where they're wearing scrubs, so dental assistants, nurses, respiratory therapists, they were all wearing the scrubs today. And I noticed that, about 95% of the people on campus this summer are the ones that are in a program wearing scrubs that go year round. So there's not as many people, so we might step over there and make the lab look full whenever they go to take pictures. I think a couple of people came in as well, but a little without somebody popped their head in the door and says something about it here in a few minutes. Which will also make a nice little break because again, this week is one of the is a vocabulary lecture. It's 2 days worth of vocabulary lectures. I'll try to break it up a little with some doing stuff and examples on Wednesdays when we're talking about attacks. But it's also going to lead to it being kind of shorter days as well, because it only takes so much of a vocabulary lecture, so many words and terms, and we got to step away from it for a moment. So cybersecurity, a big deal in our modern world. Let's write up the definition here. So our definition is state of being protected against criminal or unauthorized use of electronic data and the measures taken to achieve this. So one of those that's a noun and a verb. State of being protected criminal unauthorized use electronic data and measures taken to achieve this. So, like we've been doing a lot in this class, anytime we see a formal definition like this, you want to break it down, try to put it in your own terms, think about what it means. Criminal here is probably the most extreme thing that was just thrown in the definition because it's new and exciting. And they want to keep it a hot topic. This is probably the more important word. Right? People, anybody being able to access the computer, whether they're allowed to or not. And obviously, if you're studying cybersecurity, the last half there, measures taken to achieve this are most of what you're going to be studying. What do you do? Set up things, firewalls on the list somewhere. Firewalls are on the list for Wednesday. So we will talk about some more of that. First two things I want to talk about today. There's a couple big important aspects. First one, we'll look at malware. Any pictures? Okay. Yeah, so for those in the classroom, let's step over next door for a moment. Here we will be back in just a second. We're going to step over next door and get some pictures taken for the marketing department because we have a really nice, we just built a really nice cybersecurity lab here at Sellersburg. So I'm going to pause the recording. I need to record an empty room. Okay, that took a little bit longer than I had expected. Stepping over there, we ended up just talking in the other room for a few moments, sitting back here. So pretty much time for a break. So back to our lecture today, cybersecurity. We had that technical definition, but we've talked about it this semester. Anytime you see those technical definitions, try to break it down, analyze the definition, and find meaning in it. Almost write your own definition to make sure you understand what's going on with it. There's a key points of this. Criminal unauthorized use of electronic data. So part of that is just getting messed up. And unauthorized doesn't necessarily have to mean another human trying to get in there. So that's the first thing to talk about here is malware, which is built up of two words. I'll write it out this way. So malicious software. So instead of an acronym, they just took half of a couple words, threw them together, made a new word, but malicious software. So software automated processes that the goal is to do harm. You've probably heard of a lot of these, but like the first one, virus, you probably heard of viruses, but a lot of things that people call viruses, technically aren't viruses. There's they might be some sort of malware, or a lot of people just throw that word out there to say the computer has a virus. Doesn't necessarily mean they have malicious software. One instance that I remember in particular, somebody called up and she couldn't do anything in her computer. There's box kept popping up, getting in the way, and she couldn't do anything. It was constantly there. And, she was certain that she had a virus and needed me to come look at her computer. And I went over there and the message box says, Windows needs to install an important update. So I hit OK, and 3 minutes later, the computer worked perfectly. But she was absolutely certain that there was a virus on her computer. I guess she never bothered to actually read what the message in the box said. So people were using this word a lot. It's fading out now, but especially in the 1990s and the first decade of the 2000s, saw it a lot more. Still hear it every once in a while, but where sometimes it's the user. They don't know what they're doing, and they'll say the computer has a virus because they're doing something wrong. But a virus is something very specific. So a virus attacks a computer by modifying other programs. And inserting its own code. I guess I could have formulated that sentence a little bit better. It modifies other programs by inserting its own code. You will never see the virus directly. You'll see the effects of virus in your Microsoft Word, in your audio player. You'll see the effects of the virus, but the virus itself, all it does is run around and modifies other existing software on your computer. Very different than just software with a bug. Sometimes we'll see that as well, and that misuse of people will come across a software bug and try to attribute it to a virus. But a virus is something specifically designed to damage a machine. Next up is worms. These are self-replicating software. That attempt to spread to other machines. So we looked at batch files last week before, some point. So picture this, a batch file that writes another file, and the contents in that file that it writes are the exact same thing as itself. So it writes an exact copy of itself and then starts that running. And then both batch files write an exact copy of themselves to start that running. And before long, you've used up every resource on that machine, because that software moving at the speed that the computer does just kept writing a copy of itself. And then every time, which leads to a doubling. Because then it says as a copy of itself, that copy is also making a copy of itself. And then all those copies are making copies of itself. And before long, it just uses up all the resources. And typically worms look for networking and stuff, look for the networking at anything on the network it can access to get to other machines and continue spreading. So yeah, malicious software, there's some very specific things. You've probably heard a lot of these terms before, especially the first one there, and they would just maybe not necessarily used correctly. And very different than just when software is not working right. To be malicious software, we're talking about things that were actually designed to harm the machine. That was the entire point of it. So it's actually software is working exactly like it's supposed to. Just a human did something a human was the malicious one. The software itself is indifferent. It's an inanimate, unintelligent thing. So the human has to be a human doing the malicious part, which that's going to relate a lot to the stuff on the next page after these lists. Trojan horse. Another one you'll see on various quizzes and things along your way through education is we hear this stuff, a lot of stuff over and over again in different contexts, and it expands. Right? Like what he was talking about in the other room. A lot of that was the stuff we talked about last week. He's jumped to in different details. Instead of just quickly talking about layer 2, he jumped in and described it, or mentioned we mentioned layer 2 of the OSI model exists, and he jumped in and started talking about what was happening there. So that's what your IT education is going to be. Just go through, it expands. And machines are not capable of doing complicated things. So if you learn it all in great order and let it build up, there's no difficult steps along the way. Because machine, well, we talked about binary. Machines can only do simple things. They can either do one simple thing or not do that thing. So back to malicious software. Trojan horse is something that appears to be legitimate to gain access. Appears to be legitimate. Gain access. So the malicious part is still a virus or a worm, but maybe this one says it's a Microsoft Word installer. So you think you're putting Microsoft Office on your computer, but you're actually just installing a virus. So it's lying about what it is. And again, software can't lie itself. So a human had to use the software to tell a lie. The malicious part always comes from a human. That's a big thing with cybersecurity is the machines are inanimate and not intelligent. Even the ones where we say use the label AI anymore, there's no intelligence there. It doesn't know what it's doing. Humans have done something with the software. Spyware. So these are some words that you'll want to know moving forward. Just kind of a list to quickly go through here. Spyware collects info about data and the user.
Now we have virus, we have lines,
So things collecting whatever it wants, and usually to be spyware, or this happens all the time, and things that we have to agree to, right? With the user agreement, it's not spyware anymore. Facebook's probably the ultimate example, or Meta. Didn't they change their name again within the last month? I've been avoiding the news. I probably saw something about that, or maybe they're going to do some other stuff. But they're trying to get themselves back in the news, but they have that agreement. So they're a bag of farm. The whole social media thing is just a way to attract people while they farm people's data out. But in order to use it, you have to agree to that user agreement. So it's not spyware because it's legitimately doing its thing. This spyware would be something that, I guess, fits with the Trojan horse. Something pretending to be something else, pretending to be a video player, but it's actually recording it's recording everything on your computer that it can access.
It's still Meta.
It's still Meta. Okay.
Oh, they just launched a new app.
Oh, that's probably what I heard about. I've been avoiding the word news lately. I like to isolate myself from the world. My little bubble is much happier than the rest of the world whenever I do catch news of it. So yeah, so that would be a legitimate thing, and there's lots and lots of those out there. But when they, like the Trojan horse combination, when they do it in secret in the background without your permission, that's something entirely different. I just have one more on this list. So just starting a list, not an exclusive list, but a lot of things to look at. Keylogger is a lot like spyware, but it doesn't necessarily sort out what it's tracking. It tracks everything a user does. Track everything a user does. So you could think of it as stuff that is spyware, like the name implies, it's watching every keystroke, every mouse click. So it doesn't categorize it and break it down and organize it. It would just have every keystroke that computer ever made in the order they were made in, followed by the mouse clicks. If you dig through there, you're going to see the passwords, like find the web addresses they visited and what they clicked on when they were there. Get passwords and just keeps track of the sort of the physical layer, what's actually happening on the machine. The mouse was clicked at this spot, then the mouse was clicked at this spot, and then these words were entered, and then the mouse was clicked again, and know everything that happens in it. But just some terms to be aware of. Virus and worms, you've probably heard those used incorrectly before. So if you're heading into IT, and make sure you know the proper definition for those. And Trojan horse is what a lot of people thought viruses were when it's phased out, but it's still here occasionally, where the user is just doing something wrong and they say their computer has a virus, they're thinking of a Trojan horse. They think the software is pretending to be something else when it's really them. But don't quite know what's going on with it. But again, malicious software, malware, there's more you'll want to remember the list, but this is kind of a good start. And in particular, while you're studying IT, make sure you're learning the proper definitions of them instead of just that colloquial use. Like every time somebody screams their computer has a virus. Can I erase this? I'm going to leave that word up there and I'll erase it in a second for a segue into the next segment. Because one of the biggest problems with biggest things in cybersecurity, I was pointing out the malicious software and malware, that is purely on the human side. A machine cannot be malicious. A machine simply operates the way it was told to do. It would have to be a human that told it to do something malicious. And that's where the biggest issue with cybersecurity comes in. Scams. But just like way back at the beginning of the semester when we first started talking about how that flow from raw facts of data into contextual information, into applications of that, and then the insight gain, is an ancient need of humanity. Scams are just as ancient. As long as people have known how to talk, people have lied to each other. As long as there's been money around. Let's see if I can pull up a picture. Oh, okay. Nadir put it in the chat room. Facebook launched, or Meta launched Threads. And I knew there was something that had happened. Thank you. I didn't see that pop up in the chat room.
Basically Twitter, but less Twitter. If that makes sense.
Surprisingly, it does. Because yeah, Twitter, the people you see the most often develop a personality. There's the Twitter personality, which is different than what the same people would post on Instagram. When you said that, I was thinking, like Twitter, except that people wouldn't be worried about their grandmother saying what they have to say.
Your kids are.
Rings from the ancient world.
Oh.
I'm going to try just one search. If I don't see some pictures, oh, this is going to give rings. Maybe disk. I'm looking for a very specific one. Sandstone. Oh, here's the outcropping it's from. It's near Petra. I don't see the disk. So the ancient thing, I like to point out these ancient things. You all might remember that from back in day one. There's these sandstone disk. Roughly the area around the border of Jordan and Israel in our modern world. So around the Dead Sea, in particular, just north of the Dead Sea, there's some cliffs, escarpments, and early civilization, there were these little sandstone rings. They were all carved very, very precisely the same. All of them were carved the same. They're too small to be a bracelet, too large to be a ring. And they were carved from the same bright red outcropping. But archaeologists have found some that were made from limestone, and they used ochre and several other things mixed together to make it look like they're the actual sandstone ones. So we don't know what they are, but they were valuable enough for somebody to make a big copy of. So for somebody to make a forgery of. So for as long as there have been people, that might be what I was looking for. So yeah, this room, bird in the chat room, I'll info that here's the RNC. As far as picture, y'all have seen like stone, just a small stone ring, sandstone, so there's no fossils in it or anything. Nadir put it in the chat room. Thank you. Somewhere around there is it was valuable enough for people to forge. So we know that's an ancient thing. People have been scamming each other as long as there have been words. Computers are just the modern way of doing it. So things to watch out for. Y'all have probably heard them. And there's a fine line there. So I was just talking about forgery. So with the scams, one thing a scam has to be obvious that you're lying. If it's not obvious, then it crosses a line into forgery. And forgery falls under the jurisdiction of the Treasury Department here in America, which means Secret Service agents would be doing the investigation, which is a different type of law enforcement altogether. So scammers have to be careful not to cross that line. So there'll be something obvious in the scam. Right. Like if you go to Chase Bank, they might have something like Chase Bank. We'll send you an email saying that they're from Chase Bank. And then they can protect and defend it in court and be like, oh, we never said we were Chase Bank. So basically with scams, it's looking for those fine details, because if they cross that line into forgery, that's something different altogether. So there will almost always be something obvious. The famous one, which is actually halfway down this list, Nigerian print scams. It's like somebody says claims they're Nigerian prints or whatever, winning money. I think everybody's heard of that. But there's an obvious lie right there, because if they said, you'll never see one that says they're an Ethiopian prince, because Ethiopia really does have princes. Nigeria is a democratic republic. They have the same. They have politicians like America does. Well, the figurehead's the prime minister instead of the president, but the same structure as America, basically. So scams are somewhat easy to spot, but scammers are also really, really good. Let's look at it. Just list out a few of the more common ones. So phishing is an attempt to get someone to hand over information. The standard example of this is you get a phone call, hence the PH there for spelling phishing. You get a phone call, somebody says they're in the IT department there at your office, and they're trying to fix that. They need to fix something real quick, so they need a password to get into your computer. The obvious indicator there is the IT department at the office where you work does not need your permission to get into your computer. They can lock you out of they have permission to lock you out of your computer. So they do not need to know your password to get into your computer. But something like that, they'll try to get you to hand over information. Usually you can't exchange for money. Several scams go together, but watch out for the lies, because it is not illegal to lie to somebody. That's the big thing with scams. And if you're in a situation, one of the big things about them is people get embarrassed afterwards, because they see it clear. They can see it clearly afterwards, and then they're embarrassed and don't report it. But if they don't report that somebody got confidential information, that could cause much, much bigger problems. Just listing out some names here. Spear phishing is a very specific thing where instead of getting you to hand over information, I'm putting ... because it's a subset of phishing. So to avoid writing an attempt to get someone to hand over, instead of information, say hand over access to the information. So actually, I guess that example I just used was a spear phishing, not a phishing attack. If they ask for your password, then you're giving them access to the information, not the information itself. A phishing attack would be like, you get a text says, claiming it's from the lady in the HR department that needs to know the policy number on your health insurance account. I don't know if that would be something that's really reserved or whatever, but for an example, like they just tell you they need something that would seem obvious for the role that they claim they're in. So you send that. Or that example earlier, somebody pretending you're from the IT department says they need your password. And if you give them your password, then you've given them access to all the information you have. But again, thing with scams is watch out for the obvious lies. And that's not new. That goes, that basically goes back to prehistory. In the earliest recordings, scammers had already been around for a while, and there was already a distinction between scamming and forging. Once it crosses that line, it's a different issue altogether. So to be a scam, it does have to stay on that line. Smishing. Sometimes see it wrote without the second S in there. But that's SMS. So that's the format text messages are in. SMS messages. I think most people know that these days. You used to have to explain what SMS is, but I think these days we actually have to choose which one we want on our phone. And that way you could, because that makes a difference, like which people you communicate with, you can see, if you can see if they've read their data or if they've read the text or if it's still unopened and all that stuff. So most people know it, but same thing, instead of PH like a phone call, SMS for text message. So phishing. Phishing by text message. So even if it's on one of the other text message protocols, we'd still probably call it phishing. Because the other ones, you can check your phone for what the list of all of them are. We'd still fit it in there, and sometimes you'll see it without the extra S in there because it's not really a word to pronounce anyway. But people will say the word smishing. Cybersecurity experts that are going to use words like that a lot. Y'all have probably got some of those, right? This is America in 2023. As everybody received at least one smishing attack, you knew immediately to ignore it. Shopping scams. I like that this one's on the short list when we talk about cybersecurity, electronic scams. Shopping scams, because this one has got to be as old as humanity. Since humans first started trading, somebody was like, yeah, just give me the money now and I'll bring it back tomorrow. So no change, except it's done electronically these days. That ancient thing. Pretend to sell you a product. To sell a product. I'll put a little asterisk here for probably take money in advance.
Probably take down the website.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, but it's an ancient thing. As long as people have been trading, there's somebody that'll be like, yeah, just send me the cash and I'll drop the product off here tomorrow. And never be seen again. Just a modern form of it, but really all of these are. As long as there's been private information, somebody's been trying to get that information. Right? If it's on a contract locked in the king's safe in the back of a castle, somebody's been trying to get the key to get in that room and get that information. It's just electronic versions now. Nigerian prince, I already mentioned this one, but I think everybody's heard about it. Has money to send, but needs you to cover some fees first. And again, probably as ancient as the shopping scam. Probably some very, very early ones, tens of thousands of years ago with the same thing. Kind of like a shopping scam. Somebody's like, oh, yeah, I'll bring that product. I just need some money to go pick it up from China first. And I'll be right back with it in a couple days. I think everybody knows that, but again, that thin line between scamming and forgery. Scams aren't illegal. It's, as far as the law is concerned, it's not illegal to lie to somebody unless you are explicitly under oath. And the law does make that distinction. But if they cross that line where the lie is not obvious anymore, like Nigerian prints, if they said they were Ethiopian prints, that it's not obviously a lie because Ethiopia really does have princes. Lots of different ones. Oil, people with fortunes made in oil or something, oil bearing money. That was another popular distinction on it, which I always thought with that one, right? Some rich billionaire oil mongol passed away without any will, and the lawyers looked around, and you're apparently the next of kin. They need you to pay the fees. With that particular version of it, I think that's when Hollywood got right. Because if a billionaire passed away and you happen to be the person that would inherit the money, if there's no will or anything, your life's probably in danger, like Hollywood plays that. They're not going to reach out to you, and they're not going to track you down. But yeah, just listing out these things to watch out for. Keep a close eye on stuff, because there's obviously we hear about the bad things, but there are more honest people in the world than dishonest people. Otherwise, it would start to fall apart pretty quickly. And usually, scammers are really good at what they do. The examples I'm mentioning here all sound very, very obvious, but there's certain things worked in there. Some people are really, really good at lying. That will make it seem real. The traditional con artist thing. They can make somebody believe anything they want them to believe, and do little psychological triggers. Ask at the right time, right? Like ask for emergency information at 10:30 at night when most people are probably on their way to bed. It's going to cause them to immediately panic, or first thing in the morning. They're up and somebody calls at like 7:01 at a precise time like that, like make it look like the HR department was waiting on 7 o'clock to roll around so they could make the call, and little things like that to make it seem a little more realistic. But just keep a close eye on them. Crypto scam, again, an ancient thing, but we have electronic versions. Use investors' ignorance. I can spell the word correctly. Ignorance. Well, I wrote crypto scam, so I'll use that word. Of cryptocurrency, because this has been a big one recently. To get them to transfer it. That was big on the news when I wrote these notes maybe 2 summers ago. It had just happened in a big way, but a lot of people heard that it was a good investment, so they invested in it. It's an active investment. It's a good investment if you treat it like a day trader, where you show up and work a full 8-hour day shift of just trade, buying and selling those all day long. But a lot of people didn't know how that worked. So they'd invest it thinking it was something like the stock market funds, where a whole bunch of things are collected, and they didn't really know what it was, and they have a bunch of money sitting there. And somebody would call up pretending to be maybe from the platform they were trading from. So getting into a phishing or spear phishing account and convince them that they need to transfer that somewhere else, so they're going to lose it. Taking advantage of people not knowing what they're doing. But again, an ancient scam, because there's always been people that would do things they didn't fully understand and were there to readily be taken advantage of. You can just, the list goes on. That's the point that finished out a page when I was getting the notes ready, so I thought that's probably good for the classroom example. But you'll probably want to look into some of the well-known ones, because a lot of people aren't necessarily creative, so they're not going to come up with new scams. They're going to look at a scam that exists and maybe put a small twist on it. Common computer scams. You'll see a whole lot of them. So copycat websites, make something that looks like the government site, only instead of .gov, it'll be .com, IRS.com instead of .gov, so that people can quickly go there. Holiday frauds are a big one. 17 common online scams. I can't remember if I've said it in this class or not, but I always recommend looking at those, some number, usually it's best of. I guess this wouldn't be the best of list, but like if you're looking for a particular piece of software, look for the 17 best of and read through that blog to see what you should be comparing and stuff. The same thing with scams, only the word best doesn't fit there. 17 most common, and see what's on that list. Spear phishing, smishing, shopping scams. We've seen a bunch of these. Fine print scams. This one's terms and conditions. People get used to the big companies that are perfectly okay. They just have huge legal departments, so they cover the basis, and people get used to ignoring those. And then small companies that wouldn't really have any justification for having a legal documentation like that add a bunch of fine print in. But again, something that goes back for as long as humans have. I guess that goes back to writing. People work things in, fake debt, saying you owe money, and calling up. Yes, that's over the last couple of years. That's been very, very popular with like Microsoft software. Some of the things that would be running automatically that come with Microsoft. So if people open the task manager and saw them, like Windows T, Windows X, and then T to get the task manager. So there's somebody opened up the task manager, they'd see, like maybe they'd get an email saying, ComSurrogate, is your free trial on ComSurrogate's over. You got to pay $300 it'll mess up the computer or something, and start worrying people. And they look and see that that's actually software running on their computer, and they panic and hand over the money. It's like, oh, it's here, you got to do something. Don't want this company suing us because their software is still using it or whatever. Or some people might try to uninstall the software, and it's something like the one I just pointed at. That's part of it's going to mess up your Microsoft computer if you go doing that. Bad downloads, fake antivirus stuff. There's lots of them. Y'all can read through that. You want to stay up to date on it anyway, even if you're not heading into cybersecurity. I'd say at least 2, maybe 3 times a year. Look at those lists, see if there's any scams out there that you should probably be aware of, new ones or something. One more thing I want to write on the board, or just a very short, right? Actually, yeah, half-page thing notes. Okay, if I erase these. Again, nothing new. The big thing with scams is scams have to be a lie, and the lie has to be obvious. The scammer has to be able to go into court and be like, well, it should have been obvious that I was lying. Otherwise, they cross the line into forgery, and that's where, well, like in America, the Secret Service is the one that investigates and prosecutes forgeries, which is something most people don't want to get into, and in most of the world, that's who would investigate forgeries. That's not a unique American thing. It's whoever's in charge of the money in that country. Even if the forgeries were for something else, that's the legal department that searches forgeries. Does can make it easy to spot scams, but again, scammers and con artists are very, very good at what they do. So something you're going to hear quite a bit. This is one of those that's probably going to show up in the chapter about cybersecurity on all the different classes. Right, you're in a software class, and there's a software development class, and there's a cybersecurity chapter in the book. You're in a networking class, and there's a cybersecurity chapter in the book. A little bit, because it ties in all over the place. The basic tenets. I always get that. That's one of the words I always get confused. Tenants with an A means people that live in your building. Tenants with an E means a foundational point. Confidential. I'll add that at the confidentiality. I couldn't think of the adjective form of the second word quick enough, so I'm gonna go with the adverb form. You all know how English goes. We have lots of different ways, lots of synonyms, lots of different things. And integrity. Integrable. That's the word I couldn't think of quick enough, but let's write it on the board now. And availability. You can see pretty quick what the acronym for that is. Goes over pretty well in America for helping Americans remember this. So CIA for confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information. And there's a trade-off. So think of those tenets, the foundational points. So you can think of them as the corners on the triangle. They're all connected, and if we increase confidentiality, that has to come from somewhere else, probably availability. It's in order to make it more confidential, we have to take away from availability. You think of the forms a triangle, and we cannot change the area of that triangle. We can make a different shaped triangle, so make confidentiality more, stretch that way out, but we have to take away from availability to do so. Same thing, if we want it to be more available, like freely available to everybody in the public, like say Wikipedia, then we have to start questioning the integrity of it. And we don't have any confidentiality for full availability. So there's a trade-off. Those three things go together. And if we increase one, we lose something else. Because we want to keep our data secure, but we want to do that so we can access it, know that we know we're accessing the correct data. So we don't want to give up access, over restrict the access. Some of y'all have probably encountered that at times where it's just become inconvenient to get into anything. Anybody forgot their phone recently and then not been able to log into anything? His phone's not there, and a lot of sites have started using the geolocation. So you only have to answer the phone call and enter the code once on your phone and your laptop together. And then it uses the GPS system. It's like, oh yeah, they're within 2 meters of each other. So that person is standing there. You don't have, there's no extra steps. But if you forgot your home or forgot your phone at home, you're definitely not going to get in the system, and you're probably going to get flagged because somebody tried to access the system while your phone was 10 miles away from your laptop. So there's trade-offs everywhere for that. This one, I just want to throw up this word because it's starting to come back into favor. This is what the cybersecurity experts would prefer to call something. So pen test. For a long time though, nobody knew what they were talking about. So it was called ethical hacking, because that makes it very obvious what it is. Because if you set up security measures on system, you want to make sure they're in place. So what's typically done is hire another cybersecurity expert to break into your system to see how hard it is to break into it. And really, you want the best one you can find, one that you can guarantee is going to get into your system, and then they rank it as for how hard or easy it was. Like there's always a way in. You never lock it down 100%. A computer in a locked vault that's turned off and no human has access is the only one that could really be locked down. Otherwise, there's a way in. So you need to find that level. And pen test is penetration testing. This is the term the experts prefer. Nobody knew what they were talking about, so they went with ethical hacking for a while. And now that people have gotten used to that, and cybersecurity has kind of worked its way into culture in general, people understand what penetration testing is. Penetrate those cybersecurity measures to see how secure they really are. So ethical hacking, and the standard abbreviation for it is pen test. And the main certifications that you would get for that would all say pen test on it. Just because you'll hear that word moving forward. An authorized cyber attack. That's the key word. I'm going to write that in all uppercase. Authorized cyber attack to test security measures. So set up a website and you're worried about somebody running a denial of service attack on your system. So you would have a cybersecurity expert actually launch a denial of service attack on your system, not to see if you could withstand it, because really you can't. It would happen to see how well your recovery system is. That's a big thing. Disaster recovery, mitigation. I have my notes for coming days. Yeah, so awareness, which would be like education. Mitigation, we can't make it impossible, so we make it harder. If our system is harder to get into than somebody else's system, hopefully an attacker is going to go to the other system. Hopefully they're not out for us specifically, and they're just randomly trying things, and they're going to go to a system that's easier to get into. So that's mitigation. Mitigating the problem with somebody else. And we know things happen, so disaster recovery falls under cybersecurity as well. So hire somebody for that denial of service. You're worried about a denial of service attack. So you gotta hire somebody to run a denial of service attack, so that when your system goes down, you can check your disaster recovery methods. Make sure it's automatically backed up within a few seconds once it's detected. Whole bunch of terminology. Thursday as well is going to have a bunch of terminology. I'll try to make the next step is cyber attacks. So we'll talk about the different attacks, and I'll try to do some stuff, talk about the logic and things. And it is very much a vocabulary week. And then next week is virtualization. So we'll look at Linux machines next week, set up virtual machines, look at some stuff on the cloud. And it's almost all hands-on stuff next week. But Thursday is going to be another definition day. Terms that you need to know. you've probably heard before, but kind of like virus earlier, that's the best example of it is, I know you've heard that word before, but how many times have you heard it used properly? It's a word that people just throw out and use wrong. So if you're going to be an IT expert, you want to make sure you know how to use that word properly. Does anybody have any questions about this stuff though? I see head shaking no in here. I'll give it a couple seconds to see if anything pops up in the chat room. Move this camera because I'll forget to before my 6 o'clock class. There we go. All right, so if there's no questions, y'all have a wonderful day, and I will see you on Thursday, and we'll pick up with cyber attacks then.